After an argument, my daughter canceled my ticket and left me alone at Dubai International Airport with no phone, no wallet, and no way to call for help. The worst part wasn't the bright lights or the icy air that crawled under my skin like a warning. It wasn't even the noise, thousands of voices folding into each other in languages I couldn't recognize, like the whole world was moving forward while I stood frozen in place. The worst part was the way Renata looked at me, straight into my eyes, and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one. A cold, controlled smile, like she'd finally won something, like she'd been waiting years for this moment where she could watch me break. I was 68 years old, standing in a wrinkled beige silk blouse that suddenly felt too thin for the air conditioning blasting down from the ceiling vents. My skin prickled, my stomach twisted from the mix of expensive perfume and bitter coffee drifting through the terminal. My fingertips tingled, and I recognized the sensation immediately. Blood pressure rising. Fainting risk. My body had been warning me for years, and I'd spent years ignoring it because mothers are trained to ignore their bodies. We ignore hunger, fatigue, grief, loneliness. We ignore the way our hearts crack quietly every time our child looks at us like we're an inconvenience. And Renata had been looking at me that way for a long time. 15 minutes earlier, it had exploded right at the check-in counter. She didn't even lower her voice. She wanted people to hear her. "You're a burden," she snapped, loud enough that the woman behind us stopped rolling her suitcase and stared. "You drain my energy. I'm sick of funding your luxuries." Luxuries. That word echoed in my mind like a slap. I looked around at the travelers pulling designer luggage, wearing tailored coats and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I wasn't one of them. I hadn't been one of them my entire life. I was there because I had saved every penny of my pension for 2 years. 2 years of saying no to dinners out, no to new clothes, no to small comforts just to fulfill one small dream. I wanted to begin a trip I had fantasized about late at night, alone in my quiet house. I wanted to see the desert at sunset. I wanted to feel something vast again, something bigger than the walls of my living room and the heavy silence that had lived there since my husband died. But Renata insisted on coming, not because she wanted to share the dream, because she wanted to make sure I didn't blow my money and come begging again. And I agreed. God help me. I agreed because some fragile part of me still hoped, still clung to the idea that being together in a new place might soften her, that maybe we'd talk honestly for once, that maybe she'd stop looking at me with that silent resentment I never fully understood. I was wrong. The argument started over something so small, it still feels ridiculous to say out loud. I asked the airline clerk if I could change my seat to one by the window. That was it. A simple question. A simple request. But Renata reacted like I had spit in her face, because she claimed she paid for the entire trip, and she leaned in close, her voice dropping into something sharp and private, cold enough to cut. "Pathetic mother," she hissed. "Always have been." Then she turned back to the attendant and smiled sweetly, like she was an angel and I was the one causing trouble. I stood there, stunned, my mouth opening and closing like I couldn't find air. And then she said the sentence that has haunted me for 25 years. "Dad died because he wanted to escape you," she murmured, eyes bright with cruelty. "He just wanted to breathe in a world without your mediocrity." My heart clenched so hard I thought it might split. My husband, George, had died 25 years earlier in a car accident. Renata was 15, then old enough to remember everything, young enough for grief to harden into something permanent. And ever since, she had weaponized that grief. Like it wasn't pain. Like it was ammunition. I tried to breathe. Tried to swallow the tears burning behind my eyes. Tried to keep my voice steady. But before I could say a word, Renata yanked my brown leather bag out of my hand. The last gift my mother had ever given me. And she walked away. "Renata, my documents," I called after her, my voice trembling. "Please." She didn't look back. Not even for a second. Her blonde hair caught the airport lights like something out of a shampoo commercial, and for one ridiculous moment, my mind tried to protect me by whispering, "She'll come back. She's just angry. She'll come back." But she didn't. She walked straight through security, without a backward glance. That was the moment reality hit me with full force. My boarding pass meant nothing without the passport and documents inside that stolen bag. She had planned this. She didn't just want to punish me. She wanted to humiliate me. One last lesson. One last reminder of who held the power. A wave of panic rose inside me, in stages: denial first, then rage, then terror so sharp my knees actually buckled. I was in a foreign country with no passport, no money, no phone, and no one who even knew where I was. I approached a security guard, trying to explain in broken English, my words tumbling out wrong and desperate. He frowned. Suspicion tightened his face. He gestured to another guard and said something in Arabic. I saw him reach for a phone, and a cold dread spread through me. I imagined being taken to a small room, questioned, treated like a criminal. And then I felt it. That shift in the air. The presence of someone standing beside me. I turned my head and saw a tall man with neatly combed silver hair, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, like he belonged in a different world than mine. His eyes were amber brown, sharp but strangely calm. There was a thin scar above one eyebrow. His face held the quiet weariness of someone who had carried loss for a long time. In gentle English, he asked, "Are you in trouble?" Before I could answer, his voice lowered, steady, urgent. "Pretend to be my wife," he whispered. "My driver is about to arrive. Trust me. Ask questions later." I blinked at him, unsure if I had misheard. Then he added, even softer, "Your daughter will regret leaving you here." I looked at the guards. I looked at the vast, cold terminal. I looked at my trembling hands, empty now, stripped of the simple things that made a person safe in the world. And I realized something that made my throat tighten. I had spent my whole life waiting for someone to save me. My husband, my daughter, even my own hope. And they had all abandoned me in the end. So I made the most reckless decision of my life. I gripped the stranger's hand like it was a rope over a cliff and whispered, "Take me with you." Because in that moment, it felt like the only choice that wasn't death by humiliation. It felt like the first choice I'd made for myself in decades. And as he guided me away from the guards, his hand steady around mine, one thought pulsed through my chest, hot, aching, and strange. Renata wanted me helpless. She wanted me small. But she had just pushed me so far off the edge, I might finally learn how to fly. A sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb like it had been summoned by thought alone. The driver stepped out first. White gloves, straight posture, eyes forward. He opened the back door without a word. The man beside me, my husband, according to the lie we'd just created, gestured calmly. "Please." I hesitated for half a second, long enough for fear to scream that I was about to make a terrible mistake. Then I got in. The door closed with a soft, final sound that felt like a seal being broken behind me. The chaos of the airport voices, lights, panic vanished instantly. Inside the car, everything smelled of new leather and polished wood. The seat was so soft I sank into it without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. The car began to move. I watched Dubai International Airport fade in the rearview mirror, the glass and lights shrinking into something distant and unreal. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I had just climbed into a stranger's car, in a foreign country, with no documents, no way back, no safety net. "Take a deep breath," the man said quietly, staring straight ahead. "I know this feels insane, but you're safe now." Safe. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth. I turned toward him. In the dim cabin light, I noticed details I hadn't seen before, the fine wrinkles around his eyes, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the exhaustion tucked behind his composure. This was a man who had lived many lives and buried more than one version of himself. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, forcing my voice not to shake. He didn't answer right away. Then he turned slightly toward me. "My name is Khalid Rashid," he said. "I'm 72, born in Saudi Arabia, lived 20 years in the United States." The words came measured, deliberate, like facts he had learned to present carefully. "I run companies in Dubai, New York, and Los Angeles." I swallowed. He continued, slower now. "I lost my wife 8 months ago." Something in his voice changed, not dramatic, not broken, just thinner. "I recognize that look," he said, glancing at me. The kind of pain that doesn't make noise anymore. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He nodded once. "I saw your daughter take your bag," he said calmly. "I saw the way she smiled when she did it. I know that kind of cruelty." I frowned. "You do?" "My son wears the same smile," he replied, usually right before he tries to outsmart me. The car rolled smoothly over the road, the city beginning to glow ahead of us like something unreal. I folded my hands in my lap, suddenly aware of how small they felt. "So, you help strangers because of that?" I asked. "No," he said. "I help you because I need something." There it was. The price. "I need you to pretend to be my wife," he said. "For a few hours, maybe a few days." I let out a short, breathless laugh before I could stop myself. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said simply. I stared at him, waiting for a smile, a hint of humor, anything. There was nothing. "Tomorrow," he continued, "I have a meeting with extremely conservative investors. They don't trust widowers. They see us as unstable, emotional." He adjusted his cuff, movements precise, controlled. "My wife always attended those meetings. Without her, I lose credibility, and I cannot afford to lose this deal." "How much is it worth?" I asked. $400 million. The number landed like a physical blow. "You could hire an actress?" I said weakly. "I tried," he replied. "They looked like what they were, performers." He studied me for a moment, then said something that made my chest tighten. "But you have the eyes of someone who has truly lost something. They'll believe you." This was madness. Absolute madness. "I can't do this," I muttered. "This is insane." "Yes," he agreed calmly. "But do you have another option?" The question settled heavily between us. Go back to the airport without identification? Call your daughter the one who just abandoned you? Or stay somewhere safe tonight, eat a real meal, sleep in a real bed, and decide in the morning? He paused. "I won't touch you. No affection. No lies beyond what's necessary." "And if I say no tomorrow?" I asked. "I'll take you wherever you want to go. Embassy, hotel, police, your choice." The anger rose slowly, not toward him, but toward Renata. My daughter had stripped me so thoroughly of dignity that I was now weighing whether pretending to be a billionaire's wife was safer than trusting my own child. "If I agree," I asked quietly, "what do I get?" "Lodging, meals, a phone so you can contact anyone you want," he said, then added, "and $15,000 when it's over." My breath caught. That was more than 5 months of my pension. I studied him carefully. "Why should I trust you?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "You shouldn't," he said. "But ask yourself this, if I meant you harm, would I give you clear terms? Money? A phone? The freedom to walk away?" The city lights grew brighter as we crossed a bridge. Dubai rose ahead of us like a jewel carved out of the desert, glass towers piercing the sky, gold light shimmering against the darkness. The world I came from, the world where I was a quiet, obedient mother who accepted scraps of affection, had thrown me away. And this world didn't know me at all. "All right," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll pretend to be your wife." He inclined his head. "Thank you. But I have one condition," I added. He raised an eyebrow. "You help me find out what my daughter has been doing," I said. "She didn't just abandon me, she planned it." My throat tightened. "And once I know the truth, you help make sure she never does this to anyone else again." He didn't hesitate. He extended his hand. "We have a deal, Denise." I took it. And in that moment, as the car carried us deeper into a city that glittered with possibility and danger, I knew I had crossed a line I could never step back over. When the ground disappears beneath you, sometimes the only thing left to do is learn how to fly. Khalid's villa stood on Palm Jumeirah, the man-made island shaped like a palm tree I had only ever seen in magazines at dentist offices. The gate opened silently, revealing a cobblestone driveway lined with small lights embedded in the ground. Tall palm trees swayed gently, their shadows stretching across white stone. The house itself was a blend of old and new arched doorways, softened by glass walls, warm lights glowing against clean modern lines. As I stepped out of the car, the ocean breeze carried salt and jasmine, mixing with the warm desert air. My sandals touched cool marble, and an absurd thought crossed my mind that I was about to dirty the floor. That was how out of place I felt. A woman in her 40s appeared at the entrance, calm eyes, composed posture. She wore a deep purple dress and a silk scarf draped neatly around her neck. "This is Mara," Khalid said. "She's my housekeeper. She worked with me in Europe for many years." "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Denise," she said gently, her accent soft. "Your room is ready. You must be exhausted." Exhausted didn't even begin to cover it. Before I followed her upstairs, Khalid touched my arm lightly. "You'll need clothes," he said. "Tomorrow Mara will take you shopping for the dinner." Then, quieter. "For now, get some rest. And, thank you." The guest room was larger than my entire living room back home. White sheets like clouds, a deep soaking tub, a balcony overlooking the dark sea, a robe and slippers placed neatly at the foot of the bed like this was something I did every day. "When you need anything, press this button," Mara said, pointing to a small control panel. "I'll bring tea and something light to eat. You haven't had dinner, have you?" After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed. And I broke. Not polite tears, not quiet ones. I cried the way people cry when years finally catch up with them, deep, shaking sobs that tore through my chest. I cried for my husband, for my daughter, for the woman I had been before life taught me to make myself smaller. Mara returned later with mint tea, warm bread, dates, and cheese. I ate automatically, the familiar textures grounding me just enough to stop shaking. Then I remembered Khalid's promise. A phone. I followed the sound of his voice downstairs. He was speaking Arabic in his study, his tone calm but commanding. When he saw me, he ended the call immediately and handed me a new phone, still sealed in its box. "International SIM," he said. "You can call anywhere. This is my number. Use it if you need anything." I held the phone like it was something sacred. The first number I dialed was my sister Eleanor in Ohio. She answered on the second ring, her sleepy voice turning sharp with panic. "Denise, oh my God, where are you?" Renata called. "She said you disappeared at the airport." "Disappeared?" I felt heat rush to my face. "She said you two argued, and when she turned around, you were gone. She says she's terrified." I closed my eyes. "She lied," Eleanor said, after I told her everything. Her voice trembled with anger. "And honestly, I'm not surprised." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "3 months ago, Renata called me," Eleanor continued. "She asked about the value of your house, said you were losing your mind, and she needed to protect the family assets. She wanted me to sign papers declaring you legally incompetent." The room seemed to shrink around me. "Did you?" I whispered. "Of course not. I kicked her out of my house," Eleanor snapped. Then she lowered her voice. "But Denise," she said something that still gives me chills. "What?" She said, "Mom killed Dad, and she's going to pay for it even if it takes me the rest of my life." My knees went weak. "She really believes that," I whispered. After the call ended, I sat alone in that enormous room, staring at the sea. For 25 years, I had carried guilt that wasn't mine. That night, sunlight streamed through silk curtains when I woke. The ocean shimmered beyond the balcony, and something inside me had changed. I wasn't here to beg for survival anymore. Mara knocked, bringing breakfast and the news that I had 3 hours to become the wife of a billionaire. At the Dubai Mall, the boutique staff's behavior shifted the moment they heard Khalid Rashid's name. Dresses were presented like offerings. I tried on dozens before choosing a deep navy gown, elegant, restrained, confident, pearls, mid-heel shoes, my silver hair swept into a neat bun. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone new. I saw someone I had buried. Back at the villa, Khalid was swimming. When he stepped out, water tracing faint scars across his body, he studied me carefully. "They'll believe it," he said softly. "Khalid," I said, "I need to know about your wife, the one I'm replacing." His expression softened. "Lila," he said. "She died of cancer. 8 months of watching someone you love disappear slowly." He told me about his son, Rashid, how grief became weakness in his eyes, how power turned into betrayal. That afternoon, we rehearsed. A marriage built of elegant lies, a conference in Rio, a honeymoon in Santorini, his son, my daughter. Between the lies, truths slipped out. I told him about George, about debts I paid in silence, about the ranch I sold, about the box of receipts I kept in case I ever needed proof I wasn't useless. Has she accused you of anything else? Khalid asked quietly. Yes, I said. She said my husband died trying to escape me. He looked at me for a long moment. And do you still believe that? No, I said, not anymore. That evening, as I prepared for the investor dinner, my phone buzzed. A message from Renata. I've reported you missing. I've filed for emergency guardianship. Come home and cooperate, or you'll never control anything again. I read it twice. Then I smiled. For the first time in 25 years, my daughter no longer scared me. She had no idea the woman she abandoned at the airport was already gone. The restaurant sat at the top of the Burj Al Arab, suspended between sea and sky like a declaration of power. Khalid insisted on a Rolls-Royce. A Mercedes would be too ordinary tonight, he said, almost amused. I watched the city slide past the window glass towers, flowing highways, light everywhere, thinking how unreal it was that only a day earlier I had been shaking in an airport with nothing but fear and a wrinkled blouse. When we arrived, 3 men were already waiting, all around 60, all impeccably dressed, their eyes sharp, measuring, used to spotting weakness in a single glance. Khalid introduced me first in Arabic, then in English. His hand rested lightly on my back, not possessive, not performative, protective, but restrained. Exactly what a long-married couple would look like. When he pulled out my chair, our eyes met. And for the first time, I saw something real there. Gratitude. Most of the conversation unfolded in Arabic. I smiled when appropriate, sipped water, listened. One man laughed loudly and slapped the table when he agreed. Another twisted a ring on his pinky finger while thinking. The third Faisal said almost nothing. It was Faisal who finally turned to me. Mrs. Rashid, he said in accented English, his gaze steady. Your husband tells us you have experience in hospitality. Tell us about it. The table went quiet. Khalid's shoulders stiffened just enough for me to notice. This wasn't in the script. I set my glass down carefully. I worked 32 years in the hotel industry, I said calmly. From front desk to operations manager at a 4-star hotel in Florida. When I left, our occupancy rate was 94%. We held the Excellence Award 8 years in a row. No embellishment. No lies. Just truth. They exchanged glances. Why did you leave? One of them asked. I could have softened it, could have made it vague, but something inside me refused. My husband died, I said simply. I raised my daughter alone, and when she grew up, I realized I had forgotten who I was beyond being a mother and a widow. Silence. Not uncomfortable, evaluative. Then one man nodded slowly. Honesty is rare in our business. The tension shifted. Khalid began presenting projections, figures, timelines, strategy. When he paused, Ibrahim leaned back and asked casually, Does your wife agree with this investment? Khalid hesitated. I didn't. I leaned forward slightly, scanning the numbers on the tablet. Dubai projections are optimistic, I said. But Oman is undervalued. There's potential there. You're not factoring in seasonal occupancy, labor costs, long-term growth. The room went still. Khalid looked at me surprised, impressed. Then Ibrahim laughed, long and genuine. My friend, your wife understands this business better than half our advisors. 3 hours later, the deal was signed. $400 million. Back at the villa, Khalid poured 2 glasses of tamarind juice. We sat on the terrace overlooking the sea. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I ruined your script. He turned toward me, smiling for real this time. You saved me. They were testing you. Then his voice changed slower, careful. I have another proposal, he said. My stomach tightened. Not pretend this time, he continued. A real legal marriage, 6 months, contractual. He laid it out calmly. $850,000. A monthly salary, legal protection, his lawyers shielding my assets from Renata. And in return? I asked. In return, he said, meeting my eyes, you helped me fight my son. I saw myself in him then. Betrayed by blood. Clinging to dignity. I have conditions, I said. He listened to everyone. And when we shook hands again, I knew something irreversible had begun. Outside, the sea was calm, but the war was coming home with me. Renata arrived like a storm that didn't bother knocking. She waited for a flower delivery, slipped through the gate while it was open, and marched across the marble floor in heels that struck stone like gunshots. I was in the living room reviewing contracts when I heard my name shouted, sharp, soaked in rage. "Denise!" Mara rushed in, pale, whispering that someone had forced their way inside. I raised my hand to stop her. I already knew who it was. I smoothed the front of my ivory linen dress, stood, and walked toward the foyer. Renata stood there, hair tangled into a messy knot, dark circles bruising the skin beneath her eyes. Her jeans were wrinkled, her makeup smeared. The polished, controlled woman who once looked down on me was gone. But her eyes were burning. "I thought I'd have to call the police to get into your billionaire husband's fortress," she sneered. "But here you are, playing queen." "Not now, Renata," I said calmly. "You've trespassed on private property." She laughed, sharp and hollow. "Private property? You disappear for 4 months, marry a stranger, and now you're lecturing me on manners?" She threw her purse to the floor. The sound cracked through the hall. "I know what you're doing," she hissed. "You sold yourself to this old man. You think you can erase me." Footsteps echoed from the stairs. Khaled appeared, his presence immediate, steady. Renata's eyes locked onto him, hatred flaring. "So you're the scam artist," she spat. "The one who brainwashed my mother." "Watch your words," Khaled said coldly. "I am your mother's legal husband, fully documented." Renata laughed again, but it wavered. Any judge would call this manipulation. She's 68, lost at an airport, and suddenly married to a billionaire? "The facts," I said, "are that you canceled my ticket, stole my documents, and abandoned me in a foreign country." Her mask shattered. "Yes," she screamed. "To make you understand you can't keep draining me, using me like your personal ATM." I stared at her. "I manipulated you," I asked quietly. "You made me feel guilty my whole life," she shouted. "Guilty for existing. Guilty for surviving while Dad died running from you." "He didn't run," I said. "Don't lie," she screamed and hurled a ceramic vase against the wall. It exploded into shards. Mara gasped. Khaled stepped forward, but I raised my hand. "This was mine." "You killed my father," Renata said, her voice low and poisonous. "Your nagging, your bitterness, your mediocrity." The room went silent. I stepped closer. "You're wrong." Before she could answer, she pulled a stack of papers from her bag and thrust them forward. "Proof that you're being exploited, that this marriage is a scam. He's after your money, or whatever you have left after you squandered Grandma's inheritance." The word hit me hard. "Inheritance?" I asked. "You mean the ranch I sold to pay your father's debts?" Her face twisted. "That ranch was worth millions." "Yes," I said, "and every dollar went to the creditors your idol left behind." She shook her head violently. "Lies." "No," I said. "Truth you never wanted." Footsteps sounded again. This time, they were measured. Mr. Harrison entered, briefcase in hand, his presence precise and unforgiving. He opened the case and began laying documents on the table like evidence at a trial. "Forgery, embezzlement, fraud," he said evenly. "Bank transfers totaling $680,000, illegally notarized power of attorney, sale of property below market value to evade taxes." Renata's face drained of color. "This is illegal," she whispered. "You can't have my private messages." "They're admissible," Mr. Harrison replied. "Obtained legally." Khaled turned the tablet toward her. Messages filled the screen, her words, her plans, her certainty that I would never fight back. Renata staggered. "You'd really do this?" she whispered to me. "Destroy your own daughter?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm done destroying myself to protect you." I pulled a worn leather folder from the drawer and placed it in her hands. "The truth," I said. "Something you never gave me." She opened it. Receipts, tuition invoices, debt settlements, the deed of sale for my mother's ranch. And then the forensic report. Her hands began to shake. "No," she whispered. "Dad didn't drink like that. He did, I said. 4 times the legal limit. He wasn't escaping me. He was running from his own failure. She collapsed onto the sofa, papers spilling across the floor. I didn't know, she said, voice breaking. Because hating me was easier, I replied. I took a breath. You have a choice. Repay everything. Fix what you broke. Publicly admit what you did. And if I do, I won't press charges, I said. But our relationship ends. You'll have no power over me. Ever again. She cried, then real tears. But I didn't move to comfort her. This time, I chose my dignity. Renata left the villa without looking back. The doors closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. I sank into the chair she had just occupied, my legs finally giving in, and cried harder than I had since George's funeral. Khalid sat beside me, silent, his presence steady. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Then why does it hurt so much? I asked. Because motherhood isn't a switch, he replied, but it has a limit. And today, you found yours. 3 days passed. Then 4. Renata didn't call, didn't text. Mr. Harrison checked in daily, asking if he should proceed with charges. Each time, I asked for 24 more hours, clinging to the faint hope that my daughter would choose differently. On the 5th day, Khaled called me into his office. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice careful. Something that will change everything between us. My chest tightened. When we met, he continued, I told you I needed a wife for investors. That was true, but not the whole truth. He explained about his son's petition to declare him mentally unfit, how the law favored children, how our marriage wasn't just strategy, it was legal proof of competency. You saved me, he said, without even knowing it. I stared at the documents he handed me, the petition dismissed, his freedom secured. So now, I said slowly, you don't need me. Legally? No, he admitted. But beyond the law, I don't want to lose you. He didn't offer another contract. He offered honesty. I asked for time. Then my phone rang. Mom. Renata's voice was raw, broken. I need to see you, please. I met her at a hotel. She came alone. Her husband had left her the moment consequences became real. She apologized not theatrically, not desperately, just honestly. 2 years later, I sat on a balcony in Muscat, watching the sun sink into the Gulf. The hotel we'd built together thrived. My life was full in ways I never imagined. Renata repaid every dollar with interest. She didn't demand closeness. She waited. Forgiveness didn't come all at once, but dignity did. At 70, I understood something I'd never known at 40 or 50. Love without boundaries is self-destruction. Family isn't who bleeds with you. It's who stays when you finally stop apologizing for existing.